So Paul Finebaum had some big claims in regards to the remainder of Alabama's schedule. Finebaum claiming that he would bet his house that Alabama will not make the college football playoff this year, and you already know that's something we have got to talk about. Before we do, as always, you know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you agree with Paul Finebaum that the Crimson Tide will not make the college football playoffs this year? And let me know why. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions, though small, are massive to content creators such as myself. But with all that being said, let's hop straight into this because this is a large claim. And even though I can understand part of the sentiment of where Paul Finebaum is coming from, and we'll get into that, at the end of the day, I have a very hard time betting against Nick Saban. Nick Saban has had incredible teams that have dropped a game along the way and rebounded really well. And even though the Crimson Tide have looked in ways lackluster this year in certain areas, this is still a very, very talented team. And at times this year, we have seen what they're capable of. So it's very hard for me to just flat out write off the Crimson Tide, especially when you look at the remainder of their schedule, and the Crimson Tide should win out until they get to the SEC championship game, at which point they will likely take on the Georgia Bulldogs, the #1 team in the nation. And this was ultimately where Paul Finebaum was getting his take from, that he didn't think that even though Alabama would win out, that Alabama will be able to beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. And look, in fairness, Georgia has been really, really, really solid this year on defense. Their defense has been ferocious, and they've gotten after everybody they've played. Their offense has still been clicking without their starting quarterback, and so Georgia is a really good team right now, and they deserve the #1 ranking in the nation. There is no doubt about it. But for the same reason I just said, that this is a team coached by Nick Saban, and this is still a talented team, it's very hard for me to write off the Crimson Tide when I don't even know how they're going to respond against Mississippi State, because this weekend's game is going to be very telling. This take might not have as much saliency if Monday we look back and Alabama came out against Mississippi State, played their best football of the year, played an inspired 4 quarters, a technically sound 4 quarters. We'll be having a different conversation on Monday about where this Alabama team can go. And so because of that, I'm really interested in seeing how Alabama responds against Mississippi State, and I'm very interested in seeing how they do it on the road. Because both of Alabama's major struggles this year against Florida and then the loss against Texas A&M came in hostile environments. And Mississippi State is not an easy place to play, especially with those cowbells. So I think at the end of the day, it will be a good thing for Alabama to have that experience and to be able to try and rebound from last week's disappointing loss in that experience. But at the same time, we do need to talk about where some truth lies in Paul Finebaum's assessment. And even though I don't agree with the entirety of the assessment, there is no denying that Alabama has been lackluster in certain areas this year. The Crimson Tide have been inconsistent in almost every phase of the game, and going into this year, many looked at this Crimson Tide defense thinking that would be the strength of the team. However, the Crimson Tide defense has been all over the place. They've had stretches of looking really solid and looking like the defense many expected, but they have not been able to put it together for 4 quarters, and last week, especially in the first half, they really got it taken to them. The tackling was not good. The discipline and understanding their assignments was not good, and that has many in the Alabama fan base clamoring for Pete Golding to be fired. Pete Golding has not been a popular figure amongst Alabama football fans for quite some time, but when you see the defense continue to degrade in the way that it has, it's getting very hard to deny that something needs to change. I wouldn't be surprised this week if there were some new faces along the defense just trying to get some sort of a spark. And that's something we talked about the other day, that there was puzzling play calling in the game against A&M. The one drive that I think really resonates with all Alabama fans, though not on defense, was being on the goal line and having Brian Robinson have himself a day and not even give him the opportunity to try and punch a ball in. And I get it, Bryce Young is having himself a phenomenal year, but Alabama could continue to take pressure off of their young quarterback if they establish the run game, which is something that Bill O'Brien hasn't done with any sort of consistency. And ironically, the game Alabama looked the best against Ole Miss is the one game where they were able to establish the run game in a fashion they would like. So at the end of the day, no, I don't think that the Alabama Crimson Tide hope of getting to the college football playoff is over. They control their own destiny. This is a very talented team from top to bottom, but there is a lot that needs to be worked on and corrected if they want to ultimately get to where they could go. But at the same time, I think we have to remember that repeating a national championship is incredibly difficult. Repeating a national championship when you have to replace so many individuals along your team and coaching staff is even more of a mountain to climb. But at the same time, we also recognize that this team's ability is very, very high. They have the ability to reach the college football playoffs so long as things get cleaned up. But there's a lot to clean up along the offensive line, and Alabama's defense has got a lot to work through, and hopefully we can see some improvements this weekend against Mississippi State. But I cannot in good faith write off the Alabama Crimson Tide when I haven't even seen how they've responded to the disappointing loss yet. I'll hold that reservation for after we watch this Mississippi State game, because this point could be moot if Alabama comes out and looks like a world beater and starts playing inspired football. But because of that, I am so interested in hearing from y'all. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes and N for no. Do you agree with Paul Finebaum that the Alabama Crimson Tide will not make the college football playoffs this year? And then let me know what your biggest takeaways from the season thus far are. That's it. See ya.